Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra deck tech here on my channel. Today I want to talk to you about the Fiora and Zed Elusives deck that I've been working on lately and been having a lot or even the most success with on ladder lately, and I'm a couple of wins away from Master now finally. You might have also seen me on Swim Stream the other day talking to Swim about the deck and a couple of things within the deck. And yeah, now I want to give you sort of the culmination of all the testing and talking with Swim and stuff, and where it led me and why and how I feel about the things. So we're gonna dive right into the decklist, but before we do, you know the drill. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button down below and turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content. And now let's take a look. Alright, so here's the deck. So the deck is mainly an elusive aggro deck. It has a bit of a different approach than what people did with elusives in Demacia for most of the time until like very recently, where they basically often didn't play any champions, or they only played like one champion, sometimes Fiora, but rarely. A lot of the time it was just 0 champions, Dawn Speaker, and just all the elusives they could find, even like the Silver Wing, the 2/3 tough 4/4 and stuff like that, and trying to like win their way, and that seemed to go fine. But yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of that approach. It just kind of plays a couple of underpowered cards, and it's like we really have access to powerful champions, and the good champions are better than most other units, so it seems questionable to not run them and run cards like the Wing Scout, I think is the name. So this deck kind of hybridizes the power of these two premium Demacia and Ionia champions, while primarily having an elusives aggressive game plan. But I'll dive into that a little more. First, I want to talk a bit about the cards in the deck and the structure and give you some background. So first of all, we have 3 Fleet Feet Tracker and 3, I mean, still habits from other card games, and 3 Inspiring Mentor. The list actually that I started working from with this deck was, I think, by a guy named All New Bagels that made it to Masters with a Fiora Elusives list, and it was more of a hybrid of the like Fiora Judgment win with Fiora type deck and the elusive aggression, which I quite like because it gives you like 2 game plans, but a lot of the cards work for both game plans because Fiora as a challenger also really helps support your elusive aggro. So shout out to All New Bagels here for kind of giving me the idea to mess around with this concept and drawing some inspiration from his list. But for example, he only had 2 trackers and 3 mentor, which is something I don't like, since the deck already can be a bit clunky early on. And if you run 3 Navori Conspirator, I think you really want to like max out on 1-drops, since otherwise you only have like 3 2-drops, and if Conspirator is not a 2-drop, that means you also didn't have a 1-drop, so you're skipping your 1, you're often skipping your 2 because you only have 3, and then you're like playing your first unit on 3, and that's not ideal, especially for like a proactive, fairly aggressive deck. Also, the thing is really that Tracker is a really good card. Like, sure, it's 1 health, so it's a bit fragile, but we are an elusive deck, so there are people playing elusives themselves, like there are lists that play Shadow Assassin or lists that play Shadow Assassin and Kinko Lifeblade. Like, for example, the Fiora aggro control deck that Tides of Time first played to Masters, stuff like that. And Fleet Feather Tracker does a lot there. Also, there are a fair share of the fearsome units like Mistwraith and Arachnoid Horror that you cannot block with a lot of your units, and that at times hit harder than some of your elusives. So in order to not be raised, being able to trade a 1-mana Fleet Feather tracker or a Mistwraith or an Arachnoid Horror is also a plus, because you only spend 1 mana and your first turn, where they might not even have done anything on their first turn, just floated a spell mana, and you can just use that 1 mana to trade for the 2-drop, which until they profitably, especially with board impact, use their spell mana, get even more ahead on tempo than you already do by having a 1-drop where they don't. And aside from that, there's still a bunch of random units that you can take. Like even if they have like a life plate, for example, in critical turns, you can just challenge it, put it at the end of the combat to threaten lethal before they gain the life and stuff like that. And in Elusive Mirrors, it's obviously amazing because there are a lot of elusives, and there it kills Duo, it kills Conspirator, it kills Shadow Assassin. It's just really good for 1-drop. It's still a premium 1-drop, even with the nerf that it received in open beta. And it also lets you use your mana really well for board impact. In the mid game, there are plenty of cases where just like turn 4, do this and a 3-drop, because we have a lot of 3-drops. 4 and 5 with the with the 4 mana play and stuff like that. So yeah, I've been really happy with going up to 6, and I still arguably more often than I would ideally like have Conspirator without a 1-drop. The other thing is in your opening hand, in your mulligan, if you get a Conspirator but not a 1-drop, you can't really keep the Conspirator, I think, because first of all, you might have another card you want or need to keep. Then you only have like 2 draws plus the draw step, the first draw step, to get a 1-drop, which is not that great odds. Like, it's fine odds, but it's like if it whiffs, you suddenly have a really bad card in your hand. So unless you have the 1-drop already, I think you basically have to mulligan Conspirator, which further reduces your chances at any like decent early game. And yeah, I just don't like that. I've been really happy with 3 Mentor and 3 Tracker. There's not much that needs to be said about Mentor. Mentor is just really, really good. Buffs your Elusives, buffs your Zed and your Fiora. Just an amazing card. And obviously perfect for Conspirator. But even Tracker is fine. And we have Duo and Conspirator. Just our 2-drops to get out of the gate early and just get some pressure in. Ideally, you want to have like attack token on even turns, play your Mentor turn 1, your Conspirator turn 2 with the buff as a 4/3, hit them for 4, and then you're off to the races and have like a Mentor back in hand to buff further things. I'll talk about the units first, and then we'll talk about the spells. Then we have the 3-drops, 3 Fiora, 3 Shadow Assassin, 3 Zed. A bit of a history there. The original list that I worked from only had Fiora, and for a while I was pretty happy with Fiora and like running to Judgment and kind of being a Fiora, being a deck that can win with Fiora, and a deck that just elusives people. Sort of a hybrid between Elusives and the Tides of Time Fiora aggro control deck. But yeah, as I said, I talked to Swim on the stream the other day, and we talked through a couple of things. He had after a while swapped Fiora for Zed, because he felt like Fiora is not necessary for any matchup and isn't really that much of a win condition, which is the part where I don't agree. I think Fiora actually is, first of all, it's not about matchups, as I said on the stream. It's more about, first of all, Fiora is just a very solid unit all around. It just does a lot of board control, and the simple fact that she could win the game is so threatening to the opponent, and also the fact that the opponent doesn't know how critical she is to your plan, that the opponent will go out of his way to deal with Fiora. And if they aggressively deal with a non-elusive unit, makes it harder for them to also deal with the elusive units. So if Fiora is in that regard sort of like an additional elusive, except she's better than additional elusives like Silverwing Scout, because she's a more powerful unit. She has a better cost to effect ratio. Plus she has this kind of random oops, I win kind of thing that she has going, which doesn't happen often in this deck, but it still can happen. And a big part of why it doesn't happen often is because the opponent will aggressively kill her, and you will not as aggressively protect her as you might in a Fiora dependent deck, because you don't have to. and you kind of actively want your opponent to throw their like Vile Feasts and Black Spears and Marks of the Isles at your Fiora. So your Elusives can pressure them, and your Elusives at times can safely block like small units to not take unnecessary damage, while racing on the offense without losing them to, say, a Vile Feast after combat, or like a Mark of the Isles from the block and stuff like that. So Mark of the Isles is even relevant against your Elusives due to certain block situations. So yeah, and Swim in his list at that time just played a couple of low-raw Prodigies, and I want to talk about why I think Fiora is just straight up better, even if she never like wins the game with her ability. First of all, there aren't actually that many 2 health units that you need to kill. Like, for example, if you look at the Fearsome deck, there's Arachnoid Horror and Mistrace, which is a fair share, and that leaves you like with a 2-1. But the problem is the 2-1, then the next turn can't do anything because it's a 2 attack unit, so it can't block a Fearsome. While with Fiora, I can kill something like a Mistrace without a buff yet, which happens frequently in the early game, so you can often kill the first Mistrace. Or Elise. Sure, you can't really kill buffed Mistrace, Racecaller, or Arachnoid Horror without dying, but you don't really want to. Like, the unbuffed Mistrace is something that both can kill, and Elise is something that only Fiora can kill, and Elise is a lot more important than killing a buffed Mistrace or an Arachnoid Horror, especially on curve. Since Elise is one of the most threatening things the deck can have against Elusives, if they level up their Elise, that's a really big problem, and the deck doesn't have a good answer to that. So Fiora being able to kill Elise matters a lot more than the random things that low-raw Prodigy can kill. Also, Fiora is just a better unit as a unit, so if you're just attacking against like no unit, more controlling decks, Fiora hits for 3, which really matters. Then Fiora is still virtually, in a way, a 4 health unit long term, because if you can kill 2 small things like spiders, for example, from Elise, if you get her to flip, or like you kill something, then she's like a 3-1, then you kill something with a Twin Disciplines or a Repost, then she levels up and she becomes a 4-4. So long term, she will also have a total of 4 health to work with, just like Prodigy, just in a bit different way. Also, the thing is, if you kill Elise or a Spider token with Fiora, the next turn when the opponent has the attack token, you have a 3-1 or a 3-2 that can actually block. So you can like kill an Elise and then trade with like an Arachnoid Horror, which is amazing and much, much more impactful than what Prodigy does, because Prodigy needs another turn more to be impactful, and only if the opponent has a second 2 health unit. Otherwise, on his own, Prodigy doesn't really do a whole lot. So yeah, I think you just, plus Fiora still gives you this very scary threat of like threatening to kill the opponent. So even if they don't have anything Fiora can kill that well, they will try to kill Fiora. While if you have a 2-1 Prodigy lying around and they have nothing that Prodigy, that 2-1 like does anything against, they will just ignore it. So that's a big difference. Plus Fiora still sometimes wins the game. So that's also something that Prodigy can't do. So I really, really don't think you should run Prodigy in this over Fiora, like ever. Fiora is just so much better in so many ways, because 3 attack is so much better, both at killing important cards like Elise and Kinku Lifeblade, for example, as well as just, yeah, blocking Fearsome, which is super, super important right now, as we all know. So yeah, that's why Fiora or Prodigy. But what Swim made me wanna give another shot was the whole Zed thing. I initially was skeptical because I felt like it doesn't really like add another dimension to the plan, because with the Fiora Elusive thing, you have 2 plans. You have the beatdown plan with the Elusives, and you have the protect Fiora and kill 4 enemies to win the game plan. And if you have a draw that's like an Elusive curve and draw Fiora, Fiora is just a low-raw Prodigy type card, just a 3-cost challenger that helps you not fall too far behind and control the race, or even kill opposing elusives to keep them from blocking your elusives. And if you are on the Fiora plan, your elusives are kind of just around to like block and buy you time. Especially Life Blade with buffs blocks really well, gains your health back. So both of the parts of the deck kind of work pretty well together, while Zed just is kind of like its own plan, standalone thing. It's just like non-elusive beatdown, so it in a way adds to the elusive plan, but has the downside of being blockable. But it's actually not that bad, because since Zed is 2 threats, it's still a bit like elusives in the sense that it's not that easy to block. Like, the opponent can't just like throw 2 units in front of Zed every turn. So what often happens is the opponent like has a random jumper they can use that might otherwise be blank, and they throw it in front of Zed, and then Zed deals 3 to them. So in that case, Zed is kind of like a 3-cost 3-2 elusive, which is really great. Plus it kills the jump blocker, and next turn the jump blocker is gone, and then they're in real trouble, because then he threatens 6 and a flip, or they have to jump with 2, and then it in certain matchups starts to really hurt, because then they either take a lot of damage or have to block with units they actually don't want to just throw away. And yeah, so the conversation with Swim made me want to give this another try, because I was a bit skeptical, but I liked his argument of making the deck more about racing, more about the proactive plan, and less about the like potential more reactive games where you're leaning heavily on Fiora, because there are still issues with this. Like, you can get counterplayed by stuff like Will of Ionia, Deny, and that stuff. That has been fine in my experience overall, but since you have your own Deny, so you can set up a judgment with Deny backup and stuff, but it was still like making games kind of unstable and harder than they maybe have to be. So I gave Zed a try, and when I like started incorporating Zed, I realized if I want any other challengers, it's not going to be Prodigy. And I was like, hey, why don't I just try like the good old 3 Fioras, 3 Zed package and see how that goes. Because the main upside of not leaning that heavily on Fiora anymore, and basically just being like an aggro beatdown deck with Elusives and Zed that is supported by Fiora and still sometimes just randomly wins with Fiora, allows you to give up on some of the Fiora heavy cards, in particular Judgment, which is amazing or clunky and hard to sort of support, because the opponent has too many ways to disrupt it. Will of Ionia, Deny, Vengeance, just stuff that blows you out basically. And Swim pushed more for like just giving up Will completely by like running more Purify. When we talked, only had 1, and since I wasn't the biggest fan of like 2 Purify and 2 Will in the deck, I do like 2 Purify if we don't run Will, and make the deck basically very good against opposing denies. And once you do that, you can't really be on Judgment anymore, and can't really be on like a heavy Fiora plan. So that's kind of how it all fell into place, and that's the direction that I wanted to try after we talked a couple of things through. And yeah, I really liked that it played a lot more proactive and heavier hitting and smoother. Like, everything kind of worked better together. It worked more like a well-oiled machine. And yeah, so let's finish talking about the units, and then I'll get into the rest of the deck. Then we have 3 Shadow Assassin, not much to say. Powerful card, just basically a 2-2 elusive that replaces itself. And 3 Kinko Lifeblade, sort of the mid-game bread and butter that helps you win the races, often by like attacking for 2, gaining 2 health. And then on defense, you just like a double block with back-to-back, gain another 5, kill one of their things, and then you just have a hard time losing if they can't disrupt that. Then we have low raw Blade Keeper. I have 3. Swim only ran like 2 because he's a fan of standalone, which I want to get into in a bit why I don't like that. So yeah, 3 low raw Blade Keeper, just a good thing to curve your curve your 3 drops into. Like putting this on a Fiora or a Zed is really good, but even on any of the Elusives it's great, or like on turn 5 on a live blade is amazing. The main downside of this is that the unit is a 2/3, so it's kind of useless against Fearsome without help. And then I'm currently running 2 Windfarer hatchlings as top end. This is something I have recently went back to, because I think the card's really powerful. Like one of the first things I did when I tried 6-0's Elusives very early on is I swapped the Empyreans for hatchlings, because hatchling just is such a so much more powerful of a card that can let you win a lot of games from behind, where you're kind of just like on defense, don't really have a lot of attacks, and you suddenly slam hatchling, threaten a lethal attack, the opponent has to make some bad blocks, and suddenly you are ahead because you decimated their board and their life total. And yeah, it's just like a 4/2 elusive that sort of gives you 2/3 of a free for Demacia, and that for 1 mana more than for Demacia is amazing. If I wouldn't run these, or if you don't have these yet, for example, because they are an epic, and I'm not 100% sure on this slot yet, but I've been liking them in the past and in the games I played with it so far. Currently I'm like 25-11 with variants of this list. Most of the games, to be honest, without hatchling. I think it was only like the last 6 to 8 games or something that I had hatchlings. If I would not run hatchlings, or only would run 1 hatchling because I feel like 2 is too clunky, the 1 to 2 slots would be a combination of a 3rd Twin Disciplines, a 3rd Deny, and a single Radiant Strike. But I'm not sure which 2 of the 3. Maybe a Deny and a Radiant Strike. I'll talk about that in a moment a bit when I talk about the spells and the numbers on the spells. So yeah, the spells, we have 2 Purify. It's just good at dealing with opposing elusives now that we're generally more of an aggressive race deck. It's good against like combat tricks like Mark of the Isle, which is one of the more common ways that people try to punish your Fiora and your Zed. And if you have 2 mana floating, you can just freely attack into anything. Opponent blocks, buffs, you purify, they lose their buff and their unit, and your powerful champion that they needed to get rid of is alive and kicking, and that's usually a huge swing. It also deals with other random buffs like back-to-back in like combat situations, even against Frostbite. It allows you to Frostbite your own unit to either trade instead of lose your unit for free, or just deal damage to the opponent if you're playing against something like Freljord Ezreal, where you're just trying to kill them before they combo you eventually, and that sort of stuff. So yeah, Purify, just cheap. The fact that it's burst is also very important, and even against like SI, where it's not that great, you have Mark of the Isles to fight, and you can sometimes just randomly purify a Mistwraith, setting it from 3/2 or 4/2 to 2/2 and no fearsome, and then suddenly you can block it with like a low-round Blade Keeper as a 2/3 and just eat it for free, for example, or like a Kinku Life Blade and stuff. It just does a solid amount in terms of board control and fighting back against opposing combat tricks in a cheap and efficient manner. So without Will of Ionia, big fan of the 2. With Will of Ionia, I felt like 2 might not be as necessary the way the deck played before, but yeah, with this approach, Swim is totally right. 2 is a great number. And then there's Deny. The card is not quite as important here because you're not playing as counterable of a game plan like the Fiora, the like heavy Fiora plan, and the games are faster and shorter, so there's less opportunities to use Deny, but Deny is still pretty good, and like even denying a Black Spear, a Glimpse, or a Vile Feast in situations where that kills your unit, like you challenge something with a Fiora, then they Glimpse or Vile Feast or like Black Spear after, you can deny either to protect Fiora or whatever else they're targeting. Like a common line that comes up is you challenge something and they glimpse away that unit, which means you don't get Fiora progress and they sort of free draw 2 cards, and then denying that denies them the card advantage and gives you Fiora progress, especially if it was only like a 1/1, for example. So there's still like a lot of uses, and I can totally see going back to 3, because when it's good, it's great. And some matchups like that seem more challenging, like Ionia Heimerdinger deny is pretty good because they have a lot of spells that you can hit with this that you don't have a good way to deal with, especially Steel Tempest, which buys them a lot of time, and there's no other way for you to stop it, and deny just can deny them that literally in a efficient manner, especially if it's, for example, you're trying to Fiora the Heimerdinger, and then Steel Tempest is one of the best options to stop that, because you don't have counterplay other than deny, and then having a deny is great and so on. So I could totally see going back to 3, even though it is not as universally amazing all the time versus everything. But when it's good, it's great, and wins you in spots that you otherwise couldn't. So it might be fine to sometimes have it in hand when it's not that good, versus having it more often when it's great, especially since I felt in the more challenging matchups like Heimerdinger control type stuff, for example, deny goes way up in value. And you obviously want to try and bolster your tougher matchups without hurting your other matchups too much, and I think adding a third deny is a potential good way to do that. Then there's Twin Disciplines. I have been playing 3 for quite a while, simply because I wanted to have a decent amount of 3-cost protection for my units that is both burst and works against things that deny doesn't, like opposing combat tricks, to counterplay them. But ultimately, after playing a fair share with the card is just, I mean, it's obvious that the card's not very powerful, but the card is not powerful enough, I feel like, that I want 3 anymore, because it's just kind of inflexible. Like, if you help your life, like your Elusives block with this, you give them +3/+0, but then they trade instead of like killing something for free, because if you give them the health to like not die to a Mistrace or Horror, they can't block in the first place because they're 2 attack. So it's really awkward for that sort of stuff. So it's kind of more narrow in its uses. Like sometimes you can use it just as like 3 damage to finish off the opponent, or like force a trade on a trick from the opponent, so you're trading 2 for 2 and stuff, but it's never like great, which is why I went down to 2, and when I added the hatchlings, and 2 is probably a better number. So if I would cut a hatchling, this is the last of the 3 cards I would try to add. I would probably first try to add a third deny or Radiant Strike, and if I would cut both hatchlings, I would, for starters, probably begin with like 3 deny, 1 Radiant Strike, and stay at 2 disciplines, but I'm not entirely sure. The other thing is about Radiant Strike, by the way, I initially liked Rush and tried Rush, because in theory it's great with like your challengers, because it allows them to challenge anything that they can kill with the attack they have without dying, especially on Fiora. That seems great, obviously, like it allows you to kill race callers and stuff without dying. But in the end, that doesn't come up that much, and it's still kind of narrow. And in theory, it's also good against opposing Elusives, because then they block, you rush, and so on. But that never really came up that much. But what comes up a lot, and what I find myself using my combat tricks the most actually, is on defense for blocking. Because you race, you can't really get blocked, so you don't need combat tricks on offense, other than if the combat trick presents lethal. And even then you might sometimes not want to do it, because you want to use your combat trick to protect lethal rather than use it to threaten lethal, then get blown out by an opposing trick. Purify, Frostbite, Bounce, whatever else, removal. So in reality, you just don't use your tricks very offensively. Also using your trick on a challenger and then challenging once again makes you open to like being blown out 2-for-1 potentially by stuff. But what you do a lot is, especially because that can't be blown out as much, is you use it on a blocker to enable them to block fearsome. Like for example, if you have a low raw Blade Keeper, you play your rush on it and then block, and then it's a 3-3, so it trades with horror and 3-2 mistrace, which is unfortunate. But you can always set up the block because it's a burst spell, so you burst spell and then block and then lock in the block. So even if they like have a removal, they can kill it, so the fearsome unit doesn't die, but you still prevented the damage and already set up the block. And Radiant Strike is a lot better for that, because Radiant Strike turns your low Blade Keeper into a 3-4, which suddenly eats Arachnoid Horror, eats Elise, and eats Mistrace until it starts becoming 4-2 or bigger, and still trades with like bigger Mistrace and Race Scholars. There does the same as Rush, but in a lot of other spots, it just suddenly gives you a good free block. And obviously, there are scenarios where 1 health matters, like Fiora blocking on defense, something dying to a damage spell like Valfeast, Black Spear, that sort of stuff. Or Get Excited, Thermo Beam, and so on. Just like a lot of things that deal exact damage, or like a Mystic Shot on a Zed, and then Radiant Strike can save them. And while I am aware of this, initially I thought that the way the deck plays out, Rush is going to be better and more powerful, for obvious reasons, since it denies a lot more trades on offense than Radiant Strike would. But I just realized that the defensive uses of this 1-cost spell matter a lot more and come up a lot more than the offensive use, the offensive upside that Rush provides. So that's why I decided if I want to have a 1-cost spell, it's going to be a Radiant Strike after all. And yeah, then the other spells that we have are 2 Riposte. Riposte is nice, but once again, mostly a defensive sort of removal, the trick that you use as removal. It's particularly nice because it can deny opponents lifesteal on offense and defense, especially in the mirror, so against their life plates. It's a bit risky against Shadow Isles decks because they have ping effects like Valfeast, so be aware of that, because if you use it in a spot where you absolutely need your unit to live, you might want to use back-to-back or Twin Disciplines if you can, because otherwise they will just Valfeast you. You can't refresh a barrier even if you have a second Riposte, and then your unit dies anyway. So that's important to be aware of, but otherwise it's a nice tool to deal with bigger units, especially with units that might otherwise trade with you still, even with a back-to-back, for example. And it's particularly good with Fiora. It's one of those things that helps support Fiora really well, because if she's a 3-1, Riposte is a great way to kill, say, a Hecarim, where back-to-back means she's a 6-4 and would still trade with the Hecarim. Just to name one of the more common examples. But yeah, the card's a bit clunky and not that powerful, so 2 is a good number here to kind of make the deck flow well. We already have 6 4-drop units as well. And yeah, then we have 3 back-to-back. Really happy with this. We don't have any other 5-cost plays. Back-to-back is much, much more powerful than Riposte. It presents 6 instead of 3 damage on offense to win the race, which is really important. It also enables 2 of your units to block Fearsome that otherwise couldn't, where Riposte can't. So for 1 mana more, we get a much more reliable, much more powerful effect that also is much better at just being used as burst damage on the opponent. So I really don't see why you ever would run 2 back-to-back and 3 Riposte, honestly. Sure, if anything, I could run 3 and 3, but I think Riposte is not powerful and flexible enough for how much it costs to run 3. Like, I think while Twin Disciplines isn't great, the fact that it's cheaper and can be used with your spell mana and left open all the time if you want to and need to, I would probably like a 3rd Twin Disciplines again before liking a third repost, since the difference in 3 and 4 mana is really, really big, and the difference in like quality is not that huge. But yeah, back to back, really amazing, really powerful. Actually, mostly like a defensive double removal spell in this deck. You just unless once again you represent lethal, then you're back to back to try and finish off the opponent if you otherwise would, for example, lose next turn. But once again, you want to use that conservatively. You only want to do it if you have to. Otherwise, it's better to take a turn longer and protect your board with your back to back. Card is just super powerful, so run 3, guys. So yeah, this is the list. Deck has a lot of power, a fair share of angles, and I really like the numbers. Once again, the hatchlings are the most unsure slot, but they're really powerful, and so far they have played pretty well when I tried them, because the games often go like 7, 8, 9, sometimes even 10 mana, so you will basically every game get a good opportunity to hatchling, and then hatchling can just turn around a close game or just finish off the opponent before they can take over and stuff like that. It's just a super powerful effect, and it's an additional elusive, which also matters. So yeah, this is the list. If you have any further questions about the deck and the card choices, let me know in the comments down below. I'm currently, I think, 3 wins from Masters. I'm at like Diamond 160 out of 100. So not sure if you get Masters at 100 out of 100 or at the next win like you did with all the other ranks. So probably it's going to be 3 wins to Master. We might hit Master in this video series. Alright, so yeah, if you enjoyed this, leave a like, leave a comment, let me know what you think. Also, always open to feedback regarding my content and the structure of the content. So if there are suggestions or for improvements and ideas and stuff, always happy to hear, or stuff that you would like me see doing or covering on here. In general, just talk to me, let me know what you guys like and dislike and so on, that we can get into a conversation, because after all, I'm doing this kind of stuff for you guys, the viewers. And yeah, if you want to support me, check out the description down below, and an easy and cheap way, or rather free way, to support all of the content creators on YouTube is just turn off your ad block on YouTube or whitelist YouTube on your ad block. That's a great way already to help all your favorite content creators making content for you. And yeah, now we're gonna dive into some games. We're gonna jam 4 games on ranked with this to show it in action and show you how to pilot it and how we're gonna do, and probably hit Master on camera if it goes the way it has been going so far. 25-11, so close to 70% win rate over almost 40 games. And yeah, after those 4 games, we'll have exactly 40 games, and a solid sample size to get a better idea on, like, a better indicator for the deck's win rate. And yeah, deck just felt great. Alright, so see you in a moment with game number 1. Stay tuned.